Davos is all about big ideas, and one of the biggest ideas come from Nobel laureate Michael Spence. His thoughts are admired and much sought after at this exclusive conclave. Professor Spence, thank you for speaking with NDTV.
Fun to be here.
You told me you've been coming here for a long, long time, ever since the 1970s when the forum originally began, and it's changed quite a bit.
Oh yeah, it began as a sort of conclave of European leaders as part of the process of bringing Europe together. With some academics, it was quite small and relatively unnoticed, and it's become a kind of major production kind of on a global basis. It's a big change.
But do ideas still get developed? Do things still happen here?
Well, they do. I mean, I think people come here because it's a highly concentrated exchange of ideas. It's a little bewildering, I think. You never know what exactly to go to and so on. But it's a lot of people come. The business people come and say they come because they can meet as many people as they could in a year flying around. So I think the exchange of ideas and the networking has become a pretty important part of it.
That justifies the $40,000 Davos ticket because really you get so much networking done in a short time period. But coming back to your thoughts about the main theme in Davos this year, generally the world seems to be much more reassured. They say, listen, there's no financial crisis. We don't have Europe to worry about. We've got things under control in the United States. Fed tapering wasn't such a big deal as the world thought it would be. Are you feeling reassured and comfortable?
Moderately. I mean, I think the picture that's being painted is by and large correct. There's a partial recovery in the United States, well below full potential. I think people are probably more optimistic than I am that the missing pieces that will get filled in and it will go back to full potential. Europe, I think people underestimate the risks. I mean, there's a real problem here, both economic and then transforming into social and political cohesion. Very high unemployment rates, very big sort of distortions, very big competitiveness problems in the South, painful processes of kind of converging back to something that looks like a competitive configuration. And so, and frankly, the systemic risk that was here before was essentially eliminated by the ECB. With the outright monetary transactions program, which has never been used, but it's just sitting there, so nobody in their right mind is going to bet against the ECB on that. So that has stabilized the sovereign debt markets. The banking system is still highly leveraged, and I think there's an extended period of low growth in store for us. So is it as unstable as it was before? No, but what are the prospects in the kind of short to medium term? They're a little bit grim. There's a lot of work to do.
And if you really have to highlight one single big problem, you talked about jobs, particularly a problem in Europe, but it's a problem for the rest of the world as well. In fact, 25% of the world's youth does not have a job, and that's a scary statistic. This is a lost generation that we are talking about. Could
be, yeah, if this persists. I mean, it could be very hard to predict the consequences. I mean, this spills over. Young people are a very important part of, many societies. Whether they think the society is built in a way that includes them will affect, how they vote, how they relate to the society and the political system. So this should be thought of as I think is correctly thought of as a major challenge. What it exactly is depends on the country. So in the advanced countries, you have two powerful forces that are making the employment situation difficult. One is technology is removing what are sometimes called routine jobs, both white and blue collar, and they have to be replaced by something. And the labor markets are kind of out of equilibrium. People have prepared themselves for jobs that are rapidly disappearing. And then the integration of the global economy means that, certain kinds of jobs in the middle to lower value added category and rising are, being moved to another part of the global economy. So the combination of those two forces is pretty powerful, and there's fairly big reconfiguration of these economies structurally and in terms of preparing people for the kinds of jobs that actually exist. And then it gets complicated, after that. So, there's been a long-term big problem in the Middle East with young people being unemployed. And I think that's partly that they haven't quite figured out how to manage very large amounts of natural resource wealth in a way that keeps the economy kind of going and dynamic. In India, I think there's probably going to be a fairly rapid expansion of the employment engines, that'll accelerate the movement of the rural population toward the cities. But those employment engines are really important. And then one can go from there.
Right. And in India specifically, and I know you're a pioneer in the jobs market research, so you have extensive knowledge on that front. But in India, the problem is as well, anecdotally, I can tell you that an engineer who is just recently graduated cannot get a job, the same salary as a driver or a security personnel. So he doesn't even get a 10,000 rupees job per month. And in that which way, he's forced to, question why he went and educated himself in the first place.
Yeah, no, you get these sort of transitional distortions quite often, and it's understandable, but it doesn't make it easy to deal with. So the very slow growth and the crisis in the external markets for India, particularly the service markets, did not help, right? I mean, there was a real slowdown there. And so that produced a sort of change in direction of the rate of growth of those kinds of jobs for, engineering university graduates. That's not a permanent condition, but it makes it, it creates a transitory employment challenge for people in that category for sure. And then, so you can simultaneously have people who are sort of overqualified relative to the way demand is structured, and at the same time have people who are underqualified vis-a-vis, movement into the modern economy, which tends to be the urban economy.
But what is your thought on India as an economy right now? Because what has happened over the last 1 year is the gap between developed economies like the United States and Europe and the emerging markets like India has certainly shrunk.
Yeah, no, this is a long-term process. So the gap, which reached its peak at the end of World War II, because the so-called advanced economies have been growing and the developing economies hadn't, is closing. It's a multi-decade process, but it's going to continue. You can see it in the growth rates. I mean, the emerging economies are growing at 5%. Many of them are at higher rates than that. Some of them will have high potential growth rates. I wouldn't be surprised if India's growth rate went back up to 7%.
By when?
In the next couple of years. You have an election coming. You'll probably have a restoration of reform momentum, and there's a huge amount of potential in the economy. China will probably stay at or above 7%, even though it's a little further down the development path and measured in terms of incomes. And other economies are doing well. Now, if you want to be pessimistic, you can sort of go around and say, well, Indonesia has to rebalance because they had a high current account deficit. India has to do the same thing. Turkey has its own internal problems. Brazil, is got a set of, rebalancing problems, and they have to kind of restore growth momentum with suitable attention to a fairly wide income distribution that needs to be closed. So, you can get lost in the details. But on balance, yes, this process of convergence is going to continue. And that will mean that the global context in which everybody operates will keep changing. And I think that economies and countries that are configured to be forward-looking, high-investment environments and adaptable will thrive in this kind of environment, and ones that have rigidities of a variety of kinds, whether they're political gridlock, or policies, will have much, much more difficulty and take much longer to adapt.
So in India, with elections this year, do you feel a fractured mandate could be the biggest threat to economics going forward? Is that the biggest risk, or one party versus another will also make a difference in terms of policies?
Well, based on the past, I mean, the policy stance of the major parties in India is not really all that different. Now, they may have different styles and different details and different forms of implementation, but no, I wouldn't expect the sort of economic policy stance to change. A divided government, that would probably not be a good thing. I mean, you would really whoever wins the mandate, it would be nice to have a clear win and an open road to run on, because there's quite a lot of work to do in, removing frictions, opening up, markets and so on. Again, you don't do this stuff overnight. I mean, that it's not the Big Bang solution, but in every economy, reform momentum matters, and I think the electoral results will affect that.
So you think the negative news that has been surrounding India over the last couple of years, at least from a media standpoint, we've talked about policy reforms being stalled, a lot of corruption scandals and problems in terms of just general paralysis in getting things on the move. You think that is now going to turn around?
I would guess so, yeah. I mean, I think it's become increasingly clear that it's a high priority to avoid making mistakes in policy and have clear forward momentum in this sort of opening up process. And I think while it's important in India, there's lots of poor people still, to pay attention to the distributional issues, the investment side, and the expansion of the growth engines is the other key feature. I mean, I think if you have a subset of people who have employment opportunities and another subset who sort of think things are going to stay the way they were, plus or minus a little bit, that's not a high growth environment. So yes, I expect things to move in a distinctly upward direction.
So India is still a very relevant part of the BRICS, and the BRICS as an institution, as a bloc, still stands as a strong standing in the globe?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, BRICS was always a way of, a sort of short form way of thinking about a broad array of systemically important countries. So Indonesia is not a BRIC, but it's a rather important country. So Brazil is, Turkey's not, etc. Mexico is rising rapidly, a big, important country. I mean, India and China are incredibly important because they are going to be the future economic giants of the global economy, when this convergent process finishes up. But we've got few decades to go before we get there.
So a few years to go for India's growth to pick up to 7%. And in terms of the global growth story, you do feel that the developed markets have made a step forward, but Europe still remains a problem. Is that a general worldview that you feel is fair?
Yeah, I mean, people have differences of opinion on various parts of it, but the general picture is that Japan is making a major change in direction and is a question mark in terms of whether it'll all come together. That's not negative on Japan. It's just they're in the middle of a major change, and all the pieces have to work if it's going to come out with a different dynamic. In America and North America in general, I think you have a fairly positive picture. The people who are concerned about it are concerned about political gridlock and polarization, certainly concerned about distributional issues. We have a fairly the wrong trend in terms of income distribution, and I think there are serious questions about what happens both economically and socially when you stay on a trend like that. The per capita income in the United States is $20,000 higher than the median income. It's just one way of seeing, but so if you get halfway through the income distribution, you're $20,000 below the average, and the reason for that is so much of the income has been flowing into the upper, quartile, 25%, over a couple of decades period. So there's lots of things to worry about, but I think the general picture is that, at least in terms of growth, America's recovering slowly and probably still below potential. Europe has a ways to go before it restores any kind of growth momentum. And Japan's a question mark. But it's a generally better picture from an emerging economy point of view because I think there's at least a reasonable amount of external demand growth that will help fuel growth in the emerging economies, along with the big story. The big story is the emerging economies are now big markets and generate a huge amount of demand that helps fuel their growth. And China's very important in that. So China's success will put a tailwind behind a whole lot of emerging economy growth.
And my final question, the black swan in all this, and we spoke about the jobs market earlier, is there a possibility of a global Arab Spring? Is that, to your mind, the single biggest risk that we face in 2014?
No, I wouldn't put that risk in 2014. I think I put that risk down the road conditional on ineffective responses to this equality challenge that we face. I think people are still prepared to admit that, we're trying to adapt, we're working on it, nobody has particularly brilliant answers. So I don't expect it to explode on a short time horizon. But you leave these trends in place for a long period of time and you start to get fairly extreme loss of confidence in the sort of overall approach to the way economies are structured and managed, and then you get unpredictable consequences.
Professor Michael Spence, we hope we certainly don't have to deal with that, and hopefully get your expert insights as one of those top leaders in thought.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for speaking with NDTV.
Thank you.